Welcome to The Human Experience, a podcast about the stories we live out every day and the importance of championing the vulnerability and courage of the storyteller. I'm your host, Jennifer Peterkin, and it was through my own lived story of experiencing domestic violence that this podcast was created. By traveling the globe and interviewing each guest in person, I am convinced now more than ever that stories have the power to change the world. Thank you for being here. In a world full of noise, to listen with intention is an act of resistance. But Lisa, thank you so much for sitting down with me in Salem, Massachusetts to record this show. I'm very excited to meet you. A dear friend introduced us in the podcasting world, so shout out to Matt from the Life Shift podcast for doing that. I am so thrilled to hear about your story and hear about the experiences that have shaped who you are.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate you making your way here. It's not often that I get to see and be with the people I do this with in like the flesh. So it's a nice change of pace, and I'm always thrilled just to share my story and tap into different groups and audiences that I wouldn't normally come across. So for me, it's a gift for me. So
that's what it's all about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just get the stories out there.
Yeah.
So if I ask you, where does your story begin? What does that mean to you? Where would you start?
Wow, it's a hard question for me to kind of rein in and answer, because there are a bunch of different entry points. My story kind of started, stopped, and it's hard to answer that question. So I think the most logical place is to say that it really, truly started when I was 10. I mean, if we're talking about what I'm doing in the world right now, which is, of course, what's most relevant and most important, that's where it started. I was 10 years old. I lost my dad suddenly. He passed away of what I was told was a heart attack. I'm an only child. He was my best friend in the world, total daddy's girl, did everything together, and he was gone. And it seemed, of course, super sudden and unexpected. But when I was told it was a heart attack, even as a 10-year-old child, I could get that. I understood that. It was not something that was out of the realm of possibility. Like, I understood the concept of somebody's heart stops working and they're not here anymore. So that wasn't hard for me to process. And that's how I lived my life. I lived my life growing up as a teenager and into high school and college and marriage and all those other parts of my life, believing that my father had died that way, grieving my father's death that way. And then about 12 years ago, when I was the same age that my father was when he died, I was 45 years old at the time, I stumbled on the truth that my dad had actually taken his life. And it just completely turned me inside out. It was such an impossibility. It was so unexpected. And it was not a narrative that I could really get my head around right away. And so learning that and processing that and grieving the same person twice in my life, like literally day one, minute one of losing him all over again, all those feelings, like your body remembers, all those feelings came right back like I was 10-year-old me. And now, though, I was a survivor and I didn't know what that meant. I shouldn't say that. I did know what it meant in the context of having lost someone to suicide. I lost my cousin the year before my father died by suicide.
Oh, wow.
So I was 9 when I had that first loss in my life, and it just happened to be a suicide. Next year, I lose my father. 35 years later, I learn it's a suicide. And somewhere in the middle, about 4 years ago, one of our closest childhood friends took his life. So it's been a lifelong relationship with this kind of grief and loss. That's where it all started. And now where I am today is a direct result of all of that and the work that I'm doing in the world.
Yeah. I think it's really important that you sit here and differentiate between the types of grief. Because I think there's a lot of confusion around grief. There's a lot of misconceptions around grief. And there's also a lot of I would say, forced timelines on grief and what grief should look like and how we should process things. So not only is everybody's individual experience different with how they process grief, but the situational experience as well of, how did this even happen? Because I agree there are different there's different levels almost of, one of these things is outside of anybody's control, right? It's nature taking its course. It may have been untimely or a total surprise, but like you said, a heart attack you can kind of put into a box. Taking your own life is a totally different thing, and as somebody that has to walk through that experience on the other side as a family member or a loved one, how does that processing this is a huge question, so take it however you want. How does that processing differ?
Well, there are all these elements of suicide that don't exist with generalized grief.
Mm.
And I think that's where you start. You start by recognizing, okay, there typically isn't shame attached to someone dying of a heart attack or someone getting hit by a car or
Yeah.
having cancer. There's no shame. There's no guilt. There's no what if, what could I have done? What could I have said? There is no the why factor. The why,
Mhm.
like in my case with my father, the why factor is something that I have and will always continue to need to deal with and try and reconcile with. And I really, the only part of it that I've really reconciled with is the fact that I will never actually reconcile with it because we don't fully know the why
Mm.
in the way that I think I would like to. So those parts of a suicide loss just don't exist with other kinds of loss. So it just adds this thick layer of complicated grief on top of something that's already the hardest thing we go through as human
Mm.
beings. And, there is no straight line. There's no straight pathway through it. It's such a cyclical experience. The way my mind I'm such a visual person, and the way that my mind visualizes grief, in particular suicide grief, because this is kind of the lane that I'm in the world, is like a spiral staircase. And that when I talk about it, that's how I often talk about it, with that image,
Mm.
because I kind of find myself walking up and down that spiral staircase, up and down and up and down. And it's hard to know where you're going to be on that staircase from day to day because it's just so unpredictable.
Yeah.
The only thing that I've really come to recognize and really hold on to as a way through is the idea that I have to give myself grace all the time.
Mhm.
That if it's a shit show today, then it is a shit show today.
Yeah.
And I accept that and I sit in that and I work through that the best way I can. And if I'm having an unbelievably great day and everything's firing in the right way, then great.
Yeah.
Aren't I lucky? But
Mm.
I kind of take it as it comes each time.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that you can never unknow, and I think that we have this a lot with our experiences, right? There is pre-situation and then post-situation, and
Hmm.
so in post-situation, whatever that may be, you now have this knowing that you didn't have before. And so it was uncomplicated before because you didn't have to walk through the knowing part of it. And I think it's something we miss when we talk about healing because we have this idea that there is a time and place, even if we say, we're all on our own timeline, that there's a time when we're going to quote unquote get over it. And I think maybe what we need to be more mindful of is the fact that you will never unknow this information and what it feels like to know this information ever again. And so it has fundamentally changed who you are.
Yeah. I mean, it's inception. It's that inception point. And once you reach that inception point, everything going forward includes what you just learned, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about grief and the society that we live in right now. People want to hustle through. It's such a hustle culture. So everybody wants to hustle through everything, grief included, I've
Mm-hmm.
found in my experience with people. They want to cycle through it, kind of tidy it up, put it in the box, put it in the drawer, and then shut the drawer. And that's that. And not have to consider that it may resurface, or you may get something like a grief attack down the line, or it could be delayed grief. I mean, there are so many different ways that we experience it. And I think that anyone who's dealing with grief, at whatever point that you're on, needs to just really, for their own benefit, understand that grief never ends. It just never ends. I wish I could sit here right now and say to you, look, there's a point in time and it's X number of years or months or after you do this and then that thing. That doesn't exist. And once we acknowledge that and we take that in and really understand it, kind of in our bones understand it, I feel like we at least can kind of meet things head on. We can meet ourselves where we are in the moment without the expectation that, like, if we do this set of things, we won't have to deal with this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's not a new way of looking at it, but I think it's a way that we don't often look at it, especially if we're not mired in it. And so in terms of empathy and, trying to walk alongside people that are struggling to figure it out or struggling to decide or to figure out where they are on that spiral staircase, how we can show up as friends and neighbors and community and just be in this tension where I agree there's a huge hustle culture that we struggle with, and I think part of that is being able to check something off of a list. And I am very guilty of this.
So am I.
Yeah.
I do it all the
Yeah.
time. I'm the big, anyone who knows me who's listening to this is laughing their heads off right now because of all of the lists and schedules and, check the boxes that I am constantly doing.
Yeah.
And I get it. I'm a complete victim of that state of mind.
Yeah.
For sure.
Totally. But I think that that's still worth striving for, right? And so, I can sit here and honestly say I see the damage in the hustle and the checklists and the productivity-driven mindset. It's something that I visit in therapy very frequently. So, I know there is damage there. And there are parts of it that are fine. But I think being able to sit and say, like, hey, I'm definitely not perfect at this, but I acknowledge that there is a part of this that is not allowing me to show up in a good and authentic way that, for my humanity, right? It may not be the most productive thing in terms of the corporate world or even, just how we see success. But as far as community and humanity goes, this is not serving me.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think that collectively, I think the mindset of the world that we're living in right now, people are just so conditioned to believe that there is only a finite amount of time and space to celebrate and a finite amount of time and space to grieve. And you've got to get on to the next thing and you can't show any weakness. And if you are, then there are 400 other people who are ready to swoop in and do the thing instead of you. So everybody is afraid to show their humanity and their weaknesses and their faults and all of those parts of us that make us human.
Yeah.
And that's what I think we've just as a society moved so far away from that we need to get back to. I mean, when you think about ancient grieving rituals that cultures and so many of them still practice these rituals, like when someone dies, there is so much that goes into that, both that celebration of that person's life and the grief surrounding that loss. And there are traditions that are honored and there are rituals that are performed and the space is held to do that. In some cases for long, long periods of time, because we need to honor that in a way that does justice to that person. And we don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
We don't do that anymore. I mean, I'm Jewish and I think about the traditional Shiva mourning period that I remember, like when my father died in the 1970s. You had a 7-day period of mourning where mirrors were covered and your door was open and people would come through basically 24 hours a day. And now, all these decades later, the Shiva mourning period, traditionally, if you're talking about like a reformed family who isn't necessarily orthodox or conservative, it's 2 days.
Oh, okay.
It's maybe a couple of days of a lesser version of what it ever originally started as. And then people are just kind of cycling back to their day-to-day lives. So I think a lot of it has to do with how far away we've gotten from the importance of honoring these losses that we experience.
Yeah, these moments in our lives that, again, fundamentally change us and change our lives. So I imagine, but please correct me if I'm wrong, that when you found out about your dad's suicide, that it was a complicated grief, not only because of the suicide, but realizing that you had been lied to. What how did you kind of move through juggling that? Was your mom still alive when you found out?
My mom was, and fortunately is still. And I have to say that of all the moving parts associated with all of this for me and my personal story, this was the easiest part for me to move through,
Good.
to be honest with you.
That's great.
Yeah, and I look back on it now, a dozen years after I learned the truth, and I can say with as much certainty right now in this moment as I could 12 years ago when I sat across the table from my mom asking her if my father took his life, and she said yes, and I never saw that one coming. I can tell you that I feel strongly now, as I did then, that my mother gave me such an amazing gift by shielding me from that, by protecting me from that, whatever you want to call it. Anyone who's listening wants to think of it as that's what it was for me. Because as a 10-year-old girl, I didn't have any siblings. My father was my person in this world, and all of a sudden he was gone and he was never coming back. The last thing in the world my mother ever wanted to do in 1978, when nobody in the world was talking about suicide or depression or mental illness or therapy, you were ostracized if you talked about those things. The last thing in the world she wanted was to tell me my father was gone forever. And oh, by the way, it was a suicide and daddy took his life. Because what was I going to do with that? As a 10-year-old kid without any kind of support system in the world, there were no groups or clubs that would support that kind of situation. So she spared me is the way that I look at it. And the only reason why I really wish at this point that I could have known in that moment was so that I could have been there to support her. Because the one part of my story we haven't talked about yet that's relevant is that not only did my mother not tell me about my father's suicide, my mother did not say a word to a living soul about my father's suicide.
Oh, wow.
So she found him. My father passed away at home. It was a unique situation because my dad worked in the city. So you and I are sitting here just north of Boston. He worked in Boston. And my dad was like every other dad back in the 1970s, got up and went to work every day, came home. My mom worked about a quarter mile up the road as a secretary at a nursing home. So she was right there within proximity to my house. And she worked part-time because she was also home with me. So my father happened to be staying home the day that he passed away. He had had some minor surgery and was not feeling comfortable and didn't want to go into work and be in the office all day, so he was staying home. But he did say he wanted to go out to lunch with my mom because he was rarely, if ever, home during the day like that. So it was an opportunity for them. So he was supposed to pick her up at work, and he never showed up to pick her up. And my mother had not seen him that morning because the other little wrinkle in the story is that the night before, so everything had been orchestrated. He had planned everything. We had a split-level house, bedrooms up top, family room downstairs, and the Red Sox were playing. And my dad wanted to watch the game, and he was taking medication at night for the procedure he had had. So he didn't want to wake my mom. or at least that's what he told her. And so he slept downstairs on the pull-out sofa so that he could watch the game and not wake my mom. And so we didn't see him in the morning. Normally, I would have run downstairs and jumped on the bed and said good morning, but my mother said, "Don't go downstairs. Daddy was up late watching the game." So I didn't. And the two of us left the house, wrote him a note that he never saw, and then he never showed up to pick her up. So she started calling the house. He wouldn't answer, and then eventually someone from the nursing home went with her because they could tell she was worried, and she found him. And it appeared that he had had a heart attack, so that's what it appeared. It was later determined that he did not. There was a note that was found. The person didn't know. The person who went to the house with my mother did not know that. So she was really the only one who knew that there was a note.
Wow.
And kept that and chose in that moment to keep that to herself, and not just from me, but from anyone else, so that there wouldn't be a chance that that narrative would be discovered.
Yeah.
So that's the only reason why I do really wish that I had known back then, was so that I could have supported her. But that's why I'm so grateful that now that we've been talking about this for a dozen years, we've had the most beautiful 12-year-long conversation that started the day that I found out and continues today.
Wow.
Mm.
My heart breaks for your mother.
Mine too.
Do you believe that it was in an effort to protect him that she wanted to keep that to herself, or because of stigmas, or why do you think she wanted to keep that to herself?
We've talked about this so many different times and from so many different angles. And my mother was never, my mom has always been very progressive in her thinking. And even back then, number one, she has never held anything against my father for leaving. Never angry at my father for leaving. She understood a lot of it, we believe, had to do with his family and the way that my father's family dynamic was.
Mm.
It was a very toxic family. My father was definitely an anomaly in that family. And it was a very hard family to be a part of in any capacity, and he helped with the family business, and that added another whole set of issues to an already complicated family dynamic. So she was never upset with him at all, and she was never someone who really gave any oxygen to the whole shame issue at all in any way, the tabooness of it. Like, that's not the way my mother's wired. So it wasn't to protect the family. The decision was for one reason only, and that was to protect me.
Wow.
Which was the same reason why when the note was found, it was a very, very short note. She took it into my parents had a bathroom in their bedroom that was a private bathroom. So she took it in there, opened it, read it once, and flushed it down the toilet because she felt confident that I was a really inquisitive kid. Like, I always related better to adults than I did kids. I just wanted to be part of the bigger conversation.
Yeah.
I always did. So my mother just had this feeling that if that note stayed in our house anywhere, no matter where it was, I was going to find that note, and I was going to have questions, and I was going to need answers. And she just was trying to ensure that that didn't happen. So that was her singular goal. And I don't believe there was any other goal at all.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I just, again, my heart breaks for her, but that is such an incredible show of strength and just the love of a mother to have that kind of forethought in the midst of her own, I'm sure, absolutely devastating grief and surprise. Because it sounds like it was a surprise that this happened, that she wasn't necessarily worried about him doing this beforehand.
No, not
even
at all.
if there was understanding after the fact.
Yeah, there was no real sign or signal until the very, very end of his life, maybe a few weeks or so before he passed away. And she's reflected on this a few times, that she knew that the stress of the family business and that dynamic we talked about, that had really intensified. My father worked harder than anyone I know, and he did it all for the benefit of my little family and then for his own family as well. And the way my father's family saw things, it didn't matter how much you did or how successful you were at what you did. It was what you didn't do or what you could have done and there was nothing else that my father could have done. He put his heart and soul into everything that he did. He did it extremely well, but there was always fault to be found. And so it was a really, really hard situation. And, you know, my mother just did her best to navigate it. And it was in the very end that he admitted to her that he had been seeing a psychiatrist, but very briefly, had just started. So clearly that was too little, a little bit too late. But other than that, and other than knowing that he had had some real disappointment with his family, she never really saw any other signs.
Yeah.
He's a very joyful man. He loved life. He climbed mountains. He was a very, very skilled mountaineer. He raced cars as a hobby. He played tennis. He was incredibly active, super present as a husband, as a dad. I mean, I look back and I think about my childhood. Every morning of my life was Groundhog Day because my parents would sit in the kitchen at the end of the hall talking, laughing, and that's how I woke up every single day of my life.
Yeah.
So, to the naked eye, no one saw anything wrong.
Yeah. I feel like this is the narrative more and more as people are more open and as we continue to have conversations about suicide, that that the people that end up taking their lives are the happiest, the most generous, the most present people. And I think, maybe you have come to a better place. This is not something that I've had to experience before. And while I completely understand as much as I can the hidden depression and the weight and burden that they must feel to take this action, whatever it is, it's very hard to wrap your head around how, how do you see it? How do you reconcile it? And I think part of it is that you can't. But, I guess maybe how did you process that, knowing what you knew about your dad? Because like you said, you had to basically start from day one. How was that processing for you? And like, why did this happen?
It still continues. It's so interesting. You feel like, or I feel like, at this point in my life, because I'm empath and that's just how my brain is wired. So I'm always thinking. I'm thinking about things and overthinking and rethinking and processing over and over again. So I've thought about this a million different ways. I've been in therapy for years now, the last several years. And that's been the greatest gift to me, is to go back into therapy for me to kind of unpack a lot of what's come up. It has, like I said, not been a straight line by any means. I think in the first few years, if I'm being really honest, I was two totally separate people. And when I do share this part of my story, that's pretty much how I say it. You have to remember where I was at the time. When I found out, I had been married for 20 years. I was a full-time mom, but I was working full-time in the school system. I had two young kids. Our oldest was, I think, in middle school at that time, and our youngest was, like 6th grade, give or take. So I had a full life, and I had to be the mom, and I was a wife, and I showed up to work every day, and I had that persona every day. And I was a complete disaster on the inside. You talk about like compartmentalizing. I was so good at compartmentalizing. Like my children had no idea for the first few years
Wow.
that anything had happened, because I think I was just in such a state of complete shock that we could actually be talking about my dad. How could this be my dad? That wasn't my dad. And yet it was. And so there was so much to reconcile with that. Your head just feels like it wants to, kind of blow up, because it can't hold all of those things that you now need to rethink. Not to mention the whole element of now I have to rethink every memory I've ever had with my dad. Every conversation, was that real? Was that thing he said at that place at that time that was such a great core memory? Was he actually really suffering during that time? Did he did he know that he wanted to end his life at this time? Like, there were so many things that were spinning at the same time that it took me a long time to get my bearings. And when I finally did, I finally got to a point where I thought, okay, well, now I do understand it for what I believe that it is. Now my kids need to understand, because now a few years had passed. Now my kids were, middle school, high school age, and now they were at that point where, if you have mental illness in your family, I think everybody has a right to know that. I think, knowledge is power, and sometimes you don't understand where something's coming from, and that genetic cocktail can be a really, really powerful one. But if you understand that there is a predisposition for something, then there's a different way to approach it. You can be more open and more transparent about it, and you can have the conversations, and that's why I told them. And now we've had this ongoing dialogue in our family. Both my girls have struggled with some mental illness, with anxiety or with depression or both, and both are huge, huge advocates of therapy and have done such incredible work on themselves. And I think that's like silver lining. If there are silver linings to come from a story like mine, it's that, okay, I see the priority in taking these things out of the shadows and putting them in the foreground.
I think that's extremely powerful, and I 100% agree. I think personally, not that we have to be the open book with everybody, but there are very few things that I would say should be kept secrets, right? Again, you don't have to write everything that happens to you or in your family on social media, but to talk about it within your family, between, trusted people, I think it's an extremely important part of how we process things, how we remove shame from things, because I think that when we hide things, it unintentionally sometimes brings in a shame factor.
Oh, most
That this
definitely.
is that this is like a scar on our family tapestry, instead of confronting it and saying, this happened, and we acknowledge that this happened, and we acknowledge that there may be fallout for us from the fact that this happened, but we are going to move forward to heal that or fix that or whatever it may be. And this is for anything, right? Like, not just mental health, but anything in our families and in our own past. I firmly believe that having people, having community to process with is such a lifesaver, literally, sometimes. And it allows us to take accountability and responsibility for the things that we need to and leave the shame behind.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so well said. There's really nothing I can add to that, because it's everything that I believe so strongly, and through the work that I've done these last several years have come to believe is the foundation for the way we should all be moving forward. Because the essence of everything you just said, it gives us permission to talk about the things, and in doing that, it normalizes those things. And when you normalize something, they're like, what's the antidote to stigma? Normalizing. Because then there's no capacity for stigma to be created.
Right.
So I think that the more we have conversations like the one you and I are having, or that I have on my podcast, or in other places and spaces all over with people doing the same thing, like, that is how we change the collective mentality at that grassroots level.
Absolutely. And I think what you're doing is so important and so valuable, because it is one of those things that is hard to talk about, and it's hard to ask people about. And you want to be sensitive. You don't want to create undue stress or trauma onto somebody that's walking through their grief. And so, as somebody who has walked through this and continues to walk through it, you volunteering your story, I think, is such an important step. It is how we move forward, and it is how we begin to remove stigma and normalize, again, like you said, these conversations, because it is the only way that we're going to move forward and hopefully collectively heal. We need to realize, we need to know that intervention is possible. And we don't know that if we think that we are the only ones walking through something and that nobody else has experienced this level of pain before.
Yeah, and the irony to that is that everyone has something.
Yes.
Everyone is struggling with something, is challenged by something, is trying to overcome something. And yet, when we stay within our own little isolated circles, and that could even mean in our own little head, then our thought loop or our talk track is the only one that we hear on repeat. And there's no outside influence or perspective. And that's what keeps us stuck in these places. And when we're stuck in these places and we're isolated and no one outside of us knows that something's wrong, well, you can't help someone if you don't know something's wrong. And
Yeah.
like you and I talked about, like my dad was one of those people. There are the two buckets, right? There's the bucket of people who were like my dad, who do not present like anything's wrong. You see them as joyful, happy, outgoing, extroverted, in some cases, people. And then you have bucket number two, where you do see it. And they are the ones who are posting on social media, this is a terrible day, I'm in the worst place I've ever been. And okay, there's actually, I can respect that. I can appreciate that, because at least you know where you stand. You know you kind of know what you're dealing with, and that, okay, that person over there needs our help.
Yeah.
It's the people who don't tell us that something is wrong, that you don't know what you're dealing with, and you certainly can't fix something if you don't know it's broken.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I hope, because I don't know what that's like. I know in a very situational capacity what it's like to have those feelings. But I don't know in like a chemical makeup what it's like to have those feelings. And so I hope that somebody like your dad would come across conversations like the ones that you're having and maybe, feel less alone, or feel like they could reach out to somebody, or feel like just to take a moment to pause. That's what I hope happens from this kind of conversation. And again, why I think it's so important that you, as somebody who has experience in it, start those conversations.
Well, I think we both hope the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's why you're doing what you're doing. And that's why I'm out here doing the same. And it's all we can hope to do is to work together like this to elevate each other and, cross promote each other's platforms and communities, and really kind of permeate every space that we can to reach all the people who might need to hear a conversation like this, who might need to hear that, okay, look, the harsh reality is that grief's not going to end, but there are ways to work through it. There are ways to process it. There are people to help you. There are support groups and organizations and lifelines and all of these incredible tools and resources out in the world that are there, and they do you no good if you don't reach out to them. So it's like the quid pro quo.
Sure.
Like, you've got to do your part, and then you've got to kind of have a little bit of blind faith that the people you're reaching out to are going to do their part.
Absolutely.
Because it does not happen in a vacuum. It takes both sides doing what they each need to do to get you to that next place, or that safe place, or that resource.
Yeah, 100%. And I think too, we were talking about this line of thinking a little bit earlier before we started recording, of not everybody is going to resonate with everybody. And so having multiple voices saying the same thing but from their own perspective is such an important piece of it. And it's why that we should encourage others to tell their stories and to, get out there and try to platform them and encourage them. And we shouldn't look at it as in any sort of competition, because if the goal is to build community and to help other people in their struggling and suffering, then the more voices willing to and the more hands willing to help, the better the results are going to be. And so I think it's important that we really take a step back when that initial rush of maybe envy or jealousy or disappointment, and when we come across somebody that's doing something similar to us, and instead take a step back and celebrate the fact that somebody else is adding their voice to this incredibly important situation.
I wish more people had that perspective. I really do, because I think overall the world would be
Oh, yes.
a little bit of a better place than maybe it is today. But it goes right back to, we said this multiple times now, that every one of us, even though we may be going through a similar situation, we may be grieving, or we may be recovering from addiction, or we may be lost a job or a relationship. Like we're all dealing with these universal things. And even if our situation is so similar to someone else's or 1,000 other people's, there are elements to it. There are details of it. There are feelings and perspectives that are unique. No matter who you are and how similar your story is, or your platform is, or your approach is to someone else, you as a human being bring a uniqueness to it that cannot be replicated by anybody else, no matter how closely you're mirroring what somebody else is doing. So just by virtue of the fact that we're all different with different brains and different ideas, even the super similar things are going to be different.
Yeah.
They're going to have value. And look, as far as I'm concerned, and this is the reason why I talk about the things that I talk about every opportunity I possibly get, is because even if I've said the same thing 150 different times on 150 different platforms the same way, there could be that one person who hasn't heard it before, or who connected. You find one little point of connection, or one validation, or one tip or tool or strategy or lived experience sound bite, and that changes something for someone. Like, that's the whole point.
Yeah, absolutely. I get tired of myself sometimes, and
Me too. I get not of you.
Yeah.
I get tired of
No.
me.
No, I feel like I'm saying the same things to death, and not that I don't believe in their importance. I do, but I do often feel like, oh my gosh, people are so tired of hearing the same things from me. I'm like a broken record. But you're right. Our attention spans are so short and our time is so limited. You never know who you're catching when. And so if you have decided to talk about something, that a cause that matters to you, something that you are personally connected to, first of all, it doesn't matter. The people that are in your life that love you and care about you are supporting you no matter what. They'll listen to you tell it 151 times.
Right.
Because they love you and they believe in you. And the other people are the ones that are possibly running across your message, and they're the maybe one person that needs to hear it. And like you're saying, you never know who that is or when that will be. So don't stop telling your story or stories because you're afraid that people are going to get sick of hearing it. And I'm telling this directly to myself right now as I'm like, I don't know how I keep telling this. I don't know. It doesn't feel like it's making a difference, blah, blah, blah. So,
but it is. And this is the thing that people keep reminding me. So I'm going to take the opportunity and I'm going to remind you of the
Please
things that
do.
people remind me all the time. So we've talked about, I create content. I do it in a lot of different ways. I obviously have a lot of these conversations. I'm on Lifelines. I write books. I'm on a podcast as well. So I'm in all of these quirky little spaces. And if you're measuring things, if you're out in the world measuring things like downloads and likes and engagement and comments and things like that, and people sliding into your DMs, well then, okay, like there is a finite amount of that. There is not, unless you're, you know, doing some crazy, wildly popular podcast and
Yeah.
you're someone super famous, you're not going to be experiencing an endless stream of people reaching out to you.
Right.
It is finite. So what I have to remember, it's all of the people who have done all of those things that I can see and hear and feel. I get reminded all the time of the people who aren't engaging, who are hearing it, who are seeing it, who are consuming that content or that soundbite or that episode, and it has resonated with them. I can't even tell you how many people have reached out to me. Hey, I've been listening to your podcast for 6 months and I've never acknowledged it. I've never liked it. I've never shared it. I've never done anything but listen to it. But what you said today, like I had to reach out and let you know how much it's helped me all this time. And that is it for me. Like end game.
Yeah.
That's it for me. And all the other people who are constantly saying, you don't even know the people you're reaching who aren't even reaching out to you.
Yeah.
So we have to have a little bit of blind faith is what it all boils down to. And I'm telling you, right, I'm sitting in front of you pointing at you and nobody sees me actually physically pointing at you.
But she is.
Saying, Jennifer, you have to have blind faith.
Yeah.
That what you're doing matters and it's helping the people it's supposed to help.
Well, thank you, because it's a great reminder and it's very true. It is something, I intellectually believe, and sometimes to body those feelings or that knowledge is difficult. Look, doing any type of work like this is exhausting. People don't want to talk about emotional labor and what that costs you. Not that it's not worth it, but it is labor. It is something that you're pouring into. And so it is taking your time and your resources to do. And I 100% believe in it. And I think everybody has something that they care enough about that they could spend that emotional labor on. And a lot of people probably are. You don't have to be doing a podcast to do that. But for me and for anybody that is feeling discouraged with that, it's okay if you're tired. It's okay if you're feeling a little bit burnt out. Definitely take a step back and evaluate how you're caring for yourself. But don't get down on yourself that you're feeling the effects of the work that's being done.
Well, I think too, it's like you said, there's that emotional currency, there's that compassion fatigue, like what I do in the space that I'm in this mental health space, and in particular, that suicide and grief and loss space, that is heavy. And from the minute I wake up in the morning until the minute I go to bed, that or some version of that is what consumes my brain.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, it consumes my body and all of my thoughts, and we internalize all that and all the energy that's expended in kind of keeping myself okay, ensuring that I'm okay. Like that compassion fatigue is a real thing.
Yeah.
And when you add that to kind of the formula of, okay, I have to invest this much of my heart and soul into this, and then this much of my actual day and energy and focus, it is a lot. And it's very easy to get depleted. And, we just have to make sure that as the people who are putting this content, whatever it may be, out into the world, that we're also taking care of ourselves and ensuring that we're getting what we need too, because it affects us too.
Yes, we are not immune, even if we see ourselves as not the victim or the person suffering. You're not immune to the effects of everything that's happening around you.
Yeah, it's like secondhand smoke.
Yeah,
It's no different.
no. So, how did you transition from working at school in the school system to doing what you're doing now? And can you explain what you're doing now?
So I've transitioned a few times. So I've always been a writer. I wrote for newspapers and magazines very early on, like right out of college. Did that for a long time. And then my husband and I started our family, and we both agreed that one of us would stay home, and it was easier for me to make the transition to stay home. So I did that for a number of years. And then I just kind of fell into the school system. It was never anything I was trained for. It was just one of those right place, right time situations. And I did that for a long time, like 13 years, from the time my youngest was in preschool until she became a senior in high school. So that's kind of where I was. But I did different things, and I was in a classroom as a teacher. I was a tutor. I was a coach. I was many different things. And then toward the end, I was more support staff, office support staff. So I had a lot of pockets of time during the day, and I kind of brought my writing career back to life a little bit as a columnist.
Cool.
And I was writing about the thing that I was doing the most in life, which was raising kids and work-life balance and family and all those dynamics. And I started writing a column for my local hometown paper, which is, 2 miles in that direction. And that one column ended up getting syndicated, and it went all over the planet.
Wow.
And a book came from that column, and then several more parenting books came. And so I was in that space, doing that thing, writing about parenting, speaking about parenting and how to raise perfectly imperfect kids. And that was my niche for a long time. And it was 12 years ago. Now, this summer, it was 12 years ago that I had that very unexpected conversation with my mom, where I found out the truth about my dad's suicide, and it just completely shut me down. It was like hard stop, didn't know which way was up, couldn't create content anymore that I felt was authentic. My brain was just a complete disaster. So I sat in that for a long time and kind of gave myself whatever it was, I guess, that I needed in terms of time and space to just process, and slowly came kind of out of that. And it's funny how things happen. I was approached by a podcaster that I didn't know. She was out of the country, didn't know me. And I had written something, because that's what I do. I write. And it was the first time I'd ever written anything about my father publicly and his suicide. And I wrote it, and she saw it, and she found me and said, I find your story to be really compelling. Would you ever come and talk about it? And I said to my husband, I'm like, I don't think I want to do that. I don't know if I want to do that. How would I do that? And he's like, well, why don't you just do it? Just talk about it. So I did. And the feedback and response that I got from having shared my story, not only with my own kind of circle and my own world, but the external world, blew me away in a way that I had not been blown away before. And so I just saw something. I just felt something. Something shifted in me, and I just no longer felt like the work I was doing was authentic to what I should be doing. Wasn't quite sure what I needed to do. What I'm doing right now was not even on the radar of what I was doing. So I started writing, started talking, started sharing, started going on podcasts when I was invited. And little by little, I started kind of shifting into the role of an advocate, a mental health advocate, really advocating for people to call 988 and go to therapy and, reform policies. And then that led to, it's like when you find your thing, you just want to do more of the thing.
Sure.
So I found that was a place that I really wanted to be. And to me, the next logical thing was, well, I want to be the person on the other end of the phone that I wish my dad had had. So I trained with the Trevor Project and became a crisis counselor. So this is now in my 4th year of being a crisis counselor on their Lifelines. And then I got involved with Samaritans here in Boston. I'm on the board of Samaritan South Coast, and I'm also one of the facilitators for their Safe Place program, which is this virtual online support group specific to survivors of suicide loss. So I got trained and certified to do that. And started doing all these things, and also at that, about 5 years ago, started writing a new book, which was a memoir, which was the story of losing my dad twice, as a way of starting the bigger conversations about suicide and that kind of grief and loss. And at the same time, a few years ago, I just started like mad crazy collecting all these resources. I think it was because I was on the Trevor Lifelines and I was doing so much sharing of resources for people and providing all these resources that I had this huge stockpile but I didn't know what to do with them. So I kind of threw them on my website. And it just got to the point where there was so much on the website that it overtook my website. And so I kind of took a big step back and thought, I need to do more with this, something different. This is something that can benefit a lot of people, but there's no structure to it. And I really felt like different people in different communities need different things, even though we go through so many of the same things.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're in the BIPOC community, you might need something totally different than when someone in the Latinx community needs,
Mm-hmm.
or someone in the elderly community, or a veteran, or a parent. So I started categorizing all of these resources and ultimately wound up with the platform that I now created and maintain. It's called the Help Hub. And I think now there are 18 or 19 categories on there: workplace wellness, treatment. I have a new partnership with recovery.com and the folks there who are providing treatment for people. I now have this whole other cohort of people that I get to help through the Help Hub. I have tons of short form videos that talk about things like grief attacks and delayed grief and, anticipatory grief and all the different things that I write about and talk about. So now there's a YouTube channel. I started my own podcast that pipes into the Help Hub, the survivors. I have another one that I do with the folks at Calmary called the Calmary 15, where I distill down kind of hot button mental health topics real super quick.
Yeah.
And we talk about things and people get takeaways. So the podcasts are all there. My books are there. All my content is there, video, columns, and this massive, massive directory and toolkit filled with resources. And it's now become one of the most comprehensive mental health resource platforms out there.
Wow.
Yeah. Funny
That's
how things happen, huh?
fantastic. Yeah. But so good. So important. And I co-host a radio program about domestic violence, and that is one of the things that we do consistently is share resources, because it is one of the biggest questions that I get when people have questions is like, where do I even go to find out more information or to find out? And it's usually not the person. For me, it's usually not the person that is struggling themselves. A lot of times it's family and friends, and we don't always think of family and friends or loved ones wanting to be included in resources so that they have a base of knowledge about what's happening, but also ways that they can help and ways that they can cope too. Because being a family or loved one of somebody who is experiencing trauma or mental health crisis or PTSD or anything like that can be its own secondary trauma. And so to have resources for the primary person, but also the secondary and even tertiary people in these lives, anything like grief or trauma has a ripple effect. And so I think having consolidated spaces for resources where people can really dig into what they, the basic, hey, you can go to this website for this, but also here learn more about this, that, or the other, is such a helpful way that we can be there for members of our community.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree. And the other thing that I noticed was absent in providing these resources, or let's say it wasn't absent necessarily, but it was being overlooked, I think, is the fact that when you're the person who is struggling, or even in some cases when you're that support person, it's still traumatic and you're still under duress and you're still not in a clear headspace. You don't have the mental capacity to navigate the resources that are out there. We live in a digital world where everything is accessible, and it's almost like too much is accessible. And how do you sift through it all to find not only what's valuable, what you need, but what's reputable. And so that was a big impetus for me creating the Help Hub, because I curated all of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of resources to do all that work. So that when you come to this platform and you're like, I need grief support in a very specific niche, I don't know where to start. I don't know who to trust. You click and you're there.
Yeah.
Your help is a click or two away. And I think that that's such an important factor when you're talking about providing help or support for people. It's doing it in an efficient and timely way, but recognizing that people just don't have the capacity.
Yeah, truly. I think that is a huge part that's absent. You're 100% correct. The brain fog and the lack of focus that comes with any sort of trauma, which grief is a form of trauma, is so real. And so to be able to have consolidated, reputable resources. And then I agree, there is too much information out there. Anybody can put anything on the internet. And so we have a truth crisis that we've been having for quite some time. And things seem very backwards, but you want to be able to point people in the correct direction where they can find actual sustainable help and not just quick fixes and not just things that, influencers are doing because somebody is paying them to say it. And that's kind of the corporate oligarchy that we live in at the moment. But I think, too, when thinking about domestic violence, but even some other topics, people don't want to necessarily go looking because there is still shame attached to it, right? And so, they're thinking about their Google search history and what that's going to look like. And especially if you're in a domestic violence situation, what your partner is, maybe checking up on. And so to know that there are places where a lot of different information is collected. It isn't necessarily the biggest red flag for you to be on that website, and you can almost in anonymity pursue the things that you need help with, I think is an important part of it as well.
Yeah, I agree.
So, well, I think that is a fabulous journey that you've been on, not a easy one and not an always happy one, but to come to this point in your life where you have been able to take your experience and really channel it into something that has helped your family, the next generation, as well as other people around the world as well is wonderful. So I do have a question that I ask everybody at the end of each episode,
Okay, I'm
which
ready.
is through the lens of your experience, what does compassion mean to you?
Compassion means, to me, showing up as I am and meeting someone exactly where they are in that moment,
Mm.
wherever that may be, and holding space for that. And just understanding that it could take any number of different forms. They may need any number of different things, but to be truly compassionate is to recognize that we're all unique in what we need.
Mm.
And as long as we can show up authentically and hold space purely, it's a good start.
I agree. Thank you so much for sharing your story with candor and again just being willing to talk about something that there is still so much stigma attached to and we still are afraid to talk about it. I think that this is a huge way that we change the conversation. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you right back. I just appreciate you holding space for it.
Thank you for listening to The Human Experience. Everyone has a story, and I'd love to hear yours. So be sure to check out the show notes for more information about how to stay in touch. Do good and love well.